The weakness of the current process. This is an objective assessment, while incorporating complaints and opinions of others. Data issues. Electors' identity data is held at the Commission in a central database and cannot be easily shared with other government ministries or agencies. Also poses risks to data. Poor data sharing methods. Potential data privacy breaches. Time-consuming process. Process is highly manual with inputs from elector, and heavy personnel requirements including ARO, RO, CRO, and other officials. Management override. Management override of controls is a perceived risk due to the discretion which members of the Electoral Commission have over the data that is inputted. Electoral Commission officials are wholly responsible for verifying the accuracy and integrity of additions to the register of electors, so the controls in place to verify and audit registrants could easily be overridden by a bad actor. For example, the registering officer reviews a registrant's Form 3 and decides whether to allow or disallow a claim, using their discretion and knowledge of the polling district. This leaves the registering officer with substantial discretion in determining eligibility. But digital onboarding systems can automate many of the verification controls, preventing officials from overlooking errors or willfully entering forged/inaccurate information. Lack of biometric data. Verifying identity against biometric information, such as fingerprints or face scans, has a much higher accuracy rate for identifying duplicates. Dominican individuals could register under a second name and forge documents, for example, and the current process is not geared to mitigate this risk. This problem can be rectified by incorporating digital onboarding software and capturing citizens' biometric data. Periodic real-time updates. The Electoral Commission's database is not updated in real time as electors are registered and verified, meaning that Electoral Commission officials have access to outdated information until the next iteration of the list is released. This lag in registry updates stems from a. the numerous manual verification processes which take time to feed into final lists, and b. the periodic and infrequent release of elector lists. The implementation of a digital onboarding system can reduce the verification control time, and auto-populate a final register of electors which is updated in real time. The Electoral Commission can thereby view, audit, and use the finalized register at any time, with assured accuracy. Paper-based administration of elections. The voting process is entirely paper-based and manual, from the qualification of electors to the final count. This means that it is slower, more labor-intensive and difficult to prevent fraud and inaccuracies. Transparency challenges. One of the issues identified by civil society is a general sense of disenfranchisement, which comes despite the fact that there have been several reviews of the electoral list. Technology in the voter identification and registration process. Discussions on technology in the electoral process concentrate on two aspects. The first is the issue of voter identification and registration, and the second is the voting and counting of votes. In this first phase report, we are concentrating on the issue of technology as it relates to voter identification and registration. The current system does not use identification cards or biometric data as part of the process. Earlier proposals for electoral reform addressed this, but no legislation to give effect to it has been passed. Notwithstanding this, the Dominica Electoral Commission purchased a high-tech digital identity software from the Belgian firm Semlex, called Semlex BNS, with the intention of introducing a biometrics-based voter identification system and creating accurate and verifiable data to feed into the register of electors. The Semlex software has not yet been implemented by the Electoral Commission because the legislative amendments relating to biometrics were not passed and, therefore, precluded its use. The Chief Elections Officer is concerned about its current effectiveness. The consulting firm BrBpTV undertook a review of the existing system and made recommendations for the next steps in achieving the objectives of the Commission. Their study was very comprehensive as it elaborated on issues with great clarity and proficiency. In its report, BrBpTV recommended connecting voter ID to broader identity initiatives, more specifically the OECS Multipurpose Identification System (MPID) initiative, and the proposed Regional Identity Network. They opined that this would form the basis for a coordinated effort and optimal strategy to lead Dominica into the forefront of efficient and democratic identity solutions. BrBpTV report is attached as Annex 5. This idea was explored in the online survey. There seemed to be wide support among the participants in the survey for the idea of a multipurpose or national ID card. This, however, has become a moot point because that option has not materialized and is not available for implementation. The Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS, Multipurpose Identification System was a follow-up to a previously initiated project under the 10th European Development Fund, EDF, an initiative with the goal of enhancing regional integration and streamlining processes across the OECS region. The Commonwealth of Dominica does not have an established national ID system, despite several attempts at doing so, as was noted in the Pauline Welsh Consultants Report of 2017. It was noted that, through the 11th European Development Fund, EDF, the OECS was seeking to implement the new multipurpose identification card. In December 2020, a stakeholder validation workshop was convened in Dominica to discuss the OECS Unique/Multipurpose Identification System. In April 2021, the OECS issued a press release stating that an action plan has been completed for implementing a unique ID system in 4 member states of the OECS, including Dominica. It noted that the OECS unique ID system is primarily to strengthen cross-border movement of people and goods, and that the unique identifier issued will strengthen the civil registry processes and the issuance of national ID cards. However, this unique ID system has not been implemented. The overall importance of having voter identification strengthened by the use of an ID card supported by biometric data necessitated the development of a voter identification card issued by the Electoral Commission without the aspects of data sharing with registries in other government departments. The BrBpTV report made recommendations including implementation of cutting-edge identity technology to maximize the efficiency, accessibility, security, and integrity of Dominica's Register of Electors. The Commission is invited to adopt cutting-edge identity technology software, VoTrust, developed by the Caribbean Agency for Justice Solutions. VoTrust is a full-featured, voter record management platform designed to support critical aspects of voter administration, including voter registration, voter analytics, voter reporting, and as well as other essential back-office functions. The primary objective is to improve the voter registration process. Concerns about SEMLEX BNS may be addressed by expanding the current VoTrust proposals to include the collection of biometric data and the issue of voter identification cards. Although the proposed legislation has made specific provision for the use of technology, if the system is acquired early enough, some clauses in the legislation will be adjusted to bring it into conformity with the software without complete reliance on rules made by the Commission. The new legislation relating to the registration of voters. Introduction. 1. This report introduces the Draft Registration of Electors Bill, 2023, which repeals the Registration of Electors Act, Chap. 203, and the consequential Draft Registration of Electors Regulations, 2023. 2. They provide a modern and updated legislative framework for the registration of electors that conforms to international best practice. Their substance is a combination of the existing legislation, the proposed, but unimplemented, amendments of 2017 and 2019 and the additional reforms proposed during my consultancy. The language is gender-neutral and avoids references that are exclusively masculine. It is easy to read and understand and ensures that critical and sensitive elements are clearly and adequately reflected. Particular attention was given to the new provisions on the voter identification card and the confirmation of registration. The voter registration process forms the crux of the democratic process, and it is due in large part to this fact that the mechanism by which voters are registered must be measured in terms of its contribution to the electoral system as a whole. Therefore, the system of registration must be beyond reproach. The proposed legislative framework is intended to provide electoral registers that are accurate and comprehensive throughout the country. 3. The structure of the legislation is reorganized into parts along thematic lines, with subheadings under which provisions dealing with specific aspects of the theme of the part are set out to achieve greater coherence by treating provisions that relate to each other together. All of this is intended to make the legislation user-friendly. The Draft Registration of Electors Bill, 2023. 1. The bill is divided into 6 parts containing, respectively, Standard Preliminary Provisions, Part 1, Provisions relating to polling districts and the appointment of officers, Part 11, Provisions governing the registration of electors and the register of electors, Part II, General Provisions, Part 4, Provisions that deal with the confirmation of registration, Part 5, and Repeal, Savings and Transitional Provisions, Part 6. There are 60 clauses. Part 1. 2. In Part 1 the 3 clauses set out its short title. The effective date of the legislation, the definitions of certain expressions used in the bill and the application of the bill. This part clarifies that the bill is intended to apply to registration of electors for the election of members not only to serve in the House of Assembly, but in a city, town, urban or village council and the Kalinago Territory Council. Part 2. 3. In Part 2 the 2 clauses deal with the polling districts and the appointment of officers necessary to effect the registration of electors. Clause 4 directs the division of every constituency into polling districts and empowers the Commission and the Chief Registering Officer to make alterations in polling districts, to abolish them or to create new ones. Clause 5 designates the Chief Elections Officer as the Chief Registering Officer and provides for the appointment of registration officers, assistant registering officers and enumerators to perform functions under the Act. Part II. 4. In Part II the 27 clauses deal with the qualification and disqualification for registration, the registration process, the constitution of a new register of electors, the registers and lists, some general provisions relating to registration and the register of electors and the use of technology. Controversial issues relating to the qualification and disqualification for registration have been resolved under this part. Residence or citizenship. 5. One of these controversies was the extent to which residence in or citizenship of the Commonwealth of Dominica should be the predominant criterion. 6. The constitutional position is set out in Section 33 of the Constitution. Section 33, 2a, effectively prescribes that every Commonwealth citizen of the age of 18 years or upwards who possesses such qualifications relating to residence or domicile as Parliament may prescribe shall, unless disqualified by Parliament from registration as a voter for the purpose of electing representatives, be entitled to be registered as such a voter in accordance with the provision of any law in that behalf, and no other person may be so registered. 7. This reform project is governed by that constitutional provision. There is no mandate to amend the Constitution. The prevailing constitutional position is that citizenship of the Commonwealth of Dominica is not the dominant constitutional criterion to be qualified to vote. Any citizen of the Commonwealth, and that means the British Commonwealth, has the same qualifications subject to different qualifications relating to residence or domicile in Dominica. 8. Parliament has prescribed that the general rule is that a. Citizens of the Commonwealth of Dominica 18 years and over are qualified to vote if they have resided in a polling district for a continuous period of 3 months immediately before the qualifying date, and b. Other Commonwealth citizens 18 years and over who have resided in Dominica for not less than 12 months immediately before the qualifying date are qualified to vote if they have resided in a polling district for a continuous period of at least 3 months immediately preceding the qualifying date. These provisions were preserved in Clause 7 of this new bill. 9. A major discussion point was the status of citizens by investment. In the absence of any special legislation, they are not entitled to vote unless over the age of 18 years and have resided in a polling district for a continuous period of 3 months immediately before the qualifying date. This reform does not propose any legislation to address persons of this status. I should add that there are no constitutional or legal enactments or judicial decisions to clarify whether legislation conferring citizens of different categories different rights under Section 33 of the Constitution could be introduced without constitutional change. Absence from Dominica for 5 years. 10. Parliament had defined residence in relation to citizens of the Commonwealth of Dominica by prescribing that absence from Dominica for a period exceeding 5 years as a basis for deleting an elector's name from the register. However, it seemed to be generally accepted that a. No elector's name had ever been deleted from the register on that basis, and that b. No objection had ever been made against the failure to delete an elector's name on that basis. 11. The interpretation and implementation of that enactment was a highly contentious issue throughout my consultations. The explanations for the failure to implement the absence provisions which seemed most pertinent were that there were difficulties a. in interpreting that provision and b. in accessing evidence to allow an evidence-based decision on absence for 5 years. 12. This was a highly contentious issue, and it took a very long time to gain consensus with the Electoral Commission. There were concerns about disenfranchisement of persons who had been legitimately placed on the register of electors and had taken up residence overseas but maintained links of various types, including sending remittances and making occasional home visits. On the other hand, there were concerns about the manipulation of the system, bearing in mind that the legislation was defining the constitutional words residence or domicile. In this context, it was contended that a short home visit for any type of event should not stop the clock from running, as the concept of residence and domicile could not accommodate an elector spending just a few home days in every election cycle. 13. Eventually, after various compromises, the following provision was reached: electors residing outside of the Commonwealth of Dominica would not be considered absent from the Commonwealth of Dominica if in any 5-year cycle they spent an aggregate of 90 days in the Commonwealth of Dominica. 90 days over 5 years works out at approximately 18 days per year. Information on vacation entitlements in the USA suggested that 18 days exceeded average vacation entitlements, which were more in the vicinity of between 10 to 15 days per year. This led to the alternative position of 50 days per year. The Commission accepted the principle but did not agree on the time that should be spent in the Commonwealth of Dominica to avoid removal from the register of electors. This provision is square bracketed, and the selection would be a function of Parliament, as my role is advisory. A mitigating fact is a citizen can requalify as an elector by residing in a polling district for a continuous period of 3 months. Gathering evidence. 14. The issue of gathering evidence to support evidence-based decisions on issues related to qualification and disqualifications to be on the register of electors was addressed in Clause 26 by requiring the relevant public officers to provide information to the Electoral Commission and to do so in an electronic form. Voter ID. 15. The introduction of voter identification cards to persons registered as electors, supported with biometric data, was considered one of the most important reforms by almost everyone. This was regarded as essential to eliminate or minimize a wide variety of fraudulent conduct at elections, including impersonation and multiple voting. The issue of these voter ID cards has been mandated by Clause 11. The process details are to be found in the regulations. Closure of registration on the day a writ of election is issued. 16. Closing registration of electors on the day the writ of election is issued is another important innovation. In addition to matters raised by stakeholders in the consultation process, the Chief Elections Officer drew attention to the culture of last-minute applications for registration of electors when the writ is issued. This puts pressure on the resources of the electoral office at a time when the office should be focused on making adequate preparations for elections. If this is not properly managed, it creates the risk of undermining the integrity of the electoral register. The last-minute rush means that there is insufficient time for the CRO and registering officers to do their due diligence. Despite this, the unit has risen to the occasion and processed the applications, although the CEO has indicated that is facilitated by the fact that several of the last-minute applicants were not eligible. But he explained that inevitably this practice allows possible inadvertent registration of disqualified persons or of persons more than once in different constituencies and handicapped the timely hearing and disposition of I-related claims and objections before the final and definitive register of electors is published. The Commission supported the view that in order to resolve this problem, the register of electors must be closed to amendments on the day the writ for holding an election is issued. However, in the interests of fair play, matters already pending on that day may be addressed after polling day. New legislative provisions have been introduced to give effect to the fact that decision. 17. This creates a massive change in behavior and requires a change of culture surrounding elections, which the Commission must proactively foster. New measures are introduced into the Act to authorize and encourage new practices. These are aimed at stopping last-minute applications to register when an election writ is issued. Instead, eligible persons are expected to register as soon as they are eligible. The Commission will declare special registration periods during each year. These periods will be supported by public awareness/education campaigns encouraging early and continuous registration and emphasizing that the register will be closed once the writ for election is issued. The proposed special registration periods would be in addition to the continuous registration process required under the current law. These new measures are prescribed in Clause 22 and 23. Request to deregister oneself. 18. Another new measure considered a best practice is to allow persons on the register of electors to have themselves deregistered. Under Clause 24, the Chief Registering Officer is empowered to deregister an elector at his or her request in accordance with the prescribed procedures. Technology. 19. Modernizing the system for registration of electors should take advantage of the available technology, which has already been discussed. The Act, in Clauses 32 and 33, specifically makes provision for the Commission to allow for the implementation of a system of electronic registration and the establishment of a register if electors in electronic form. Consideration is currently being given to the acquisition of the VoteTrust solution. If it is approved early enough, we may be able to make regulatory changes in this Act. Giving effect to the Interpretation and General Clauses Act on penalties in regulations. 20. Section 29, 1b, of the Interpretation and General Clauses Act, IGCA, prescribes the maximum penalties that may be imposed for the contravention of regulations unless the Act under which the regulations are made provide otherwise. The IGCA also stipulates that those regulations may provide only for summary conviction for offenses they create. 21. Since it is proposed that penalties under the proposed regulations for offenses exceed the penalties prescribed under the IGCA, it is necessary to authorize the Commission and the bill to exceed those levels, where appropriate, for offenses created under the regulations. This is the import and purpose of Clause 48. Part 4. 1. The first four clauses in Part 4 address A. The continuation of the existing electoral office after the Act takes effect, Clause 34. B. Disclosure of information on electors to authorized officers, save for biometric data which requires a court order to be shared, Clause 35. C. Conferring wide regulation-making powers on the Electoral Commission, Clause 36, and D. Conferring jurisdiction on the Commission to hear and determine appeals against the decisions of the CRO and the power to regulate that in a particular matter the decision of the CRO shall be final, Clause 37. Offenses and penalties. 2. The remaining 11 clauses in Part 4, Clauses 38 to 48, create a number of offenses relating to the registration of electors and fixes penalties. Clause 48 provides a general penalty applicable to offenses for which no specific penalty is provided. Part 5. The confirmation process. 3. The clauses in Part 5 are the transitional provisions between the existing register of voters and the new register. 4. They provide that any person who is registered as an elector on the date when the new act comes into force is entitled to be registered as an elector in the preliminary register established under this act. Every such person must apply to have his or her registration as an elector confirmed within the period established by the Commission. The name of a person who is not confirmed shall be deleted from the register of electors. Such a person has a limited period within which to apply for late registration. 5. The confirmation process as detailed in the regulations require compliance with the new provisions for obtaining a voter ID card. In order to be confirmed, the elector must obtain a voter ID card. The voter must supply personal and biometric data in order to obtain the voter ID card. Persons who reside overseas would typically have to return home to Dominica for this exercise. A person who is not confirmed within the confirmation period would be deleted from the register of electors. 6. The financial implications of confirmation would vary depending on the location of an eligible person and the cost of traveling to the Commonwealth of Dominica. This means that it would be more costly for some than for others, and an eligible person who could not come home for financial, health or other reasons would be disenfranchised. Responsible authorities should put arrangements in place to mitigate this situation, particularly as it is those with the least economic means who are most vulnerable. 7. Clauses 51 and 52 make provision for the Commission to designate suitable places overseas as enrollment centers and provide limited relief to late applicants. During consultation with the leader of the opposition and his team, concerns were expressed about the retention of Clause 51. 8. There were two main concerns: mistrust of the system and fear of corrupt manipulation of the procedures. The preference that persons who wanted to exercise their franchise must come home to ensure their place on the register of electors was also emphasized. Square brackets have been placed around Clause 51 to indicate that it may be deleted. I would invite consideration of some reasons that may justify retaining Clause 51. During our consultations, there were representations that the governing party was much better funded than other political parties and that they used money to bring voters to Dominica in numbers large enough to influence the outcome of an election. It would seem that such an advantage could be eliminated by using technology-enabled systems to facilitate eligible persons to establish their right to vote without having to incur the expense of or obtain funding to travel to Dominica. Any arrangement that could reduce the cost of travel for this purpose for some people is an improvement on the default position. Selecting about 4 suitably located centers around the world should mitigate the cost for overseas voters and demonstrate the commitment to ensure that no eligible voter is disenfranchised. It would be logistically and financially impractical to establish too many enrollment centers. The Commission could make an evidence-based selection of suitable overseas locations. 9. There is already precedent and protocols established in the visa application process which could be used. A government could be requested to make its consular services available for this purpose, thus providing an impartial environment. It is recommended that a human witness should verify that the biometric data was provided by the applicant. The system used in such an arrangement would ensure that any collected data is securely transferred directly to the Electoral Commission. There will be no retention of records by any facilitating government. Suitable technology is accessible, and requests have been made to the government to support urgent acquisition. These are proposals which may remove fear of political manipulation and assist persons to confirm their right to franchise in a cost-effective manner. Part 6. Repeal, Savings and Transitional Provisions. 1. Clauses 56 repeals the existing Registration of Electors Act, Chap. 203, and Clauses 57 to 60 contain the savings and transitional provisions. Draft of Registration of Electors Regulations, 2022. The regulations are divided into Part 1, Preliminary, Part 2, Registration of Persons as Electors, Part I, Registers and Lists, Part 4 General Provisions, v. Confirmation of Registration as Elector, Schedules, Forms and Oath of Office. The substance is based on the existing regulations, provisions of the draft amending regulation of 2017 which were never promulgated and some new provisions. Part 1 Preliminary. The two clauses deal with the short title and the interpretation clause. Part 2 deals with the registration persons as electors. Enrollment officer. This part commences with prescribing the appointment of enrollment officers by the Commission after consultation with the CRO, Regs 2 and 3. These officers are engaged with the primary purpose of performing functions relating to the confirmation of registration as electors. These functions are described in Part 5 Regs 50 to 55. Ordinary residence is defined in Reg 6 and powers for house-to-house investigative visits by enumerators are conferred by Reg 7. The CRO may require enumerators to do house-to-house visits for investigative purposes as prescribed by Reg 7. Application for registration. The form and manner of application for registration is prescribed by Reg 8 and Reg 9 creates the offense of giving false information in connection with an application for registration. Reg 10 regulates the process by the registering officer in considering each application and if the applicant meets requirements of the Act the transmission of the application and supporting documents to the CRO who if satisfied completes the registration process and causes a voter identification card to be issued. Regs 11 and 12 provide that a registering officer may issue a notice of disallowance of registration if of opinion that the applicant does not qualify for registration under the Act and the process of appealing against the said notice of disallowance. Vote identification card. Regs 13 to 16 make detailed provisions relating to the voter identification card. Registration records. Reg 17 provides that registration records relating to each person shall be computer-generated and maintained in electronic form by the CRO. Regs 18 and 19 make provisions for correction of errors in the records and the reconstruction of lost, mutilated, destroyed registration records. Regs 20 and 21 prescribe the keeping of records relating to voter identification cards issued, lost, destroyed, or replaced and the safe custody of cards and other related records. Reg 22 creates offenses relating to destroying and creating false records. Registers and lists. Regs 23 to 26 gives detailed directions relating to the form revision and publication of the preliminary register. Provision is also made for notices to be given requesting entitled people omitted from the register to make a claim, inviting qualified persons whose name do not appear on the preliminary register to apply, and stating that objection can be made to the inclusion of a person's name on the preliminary register. Reg 27 requires the Commission to establish electoral revising centers in each constituency, and the CRO prior to publication of the preliminary register to publish a notice specifying places where the electoral revising centers have been established and the dates and times which applications may be made. Claims and objections. Regs 28 to 35 details the procedure for claims and objections in relation to the preliminary register. Reg 34 outlines information gathering powers of the CRO, the registering officers and the enumerators in the discharge of their functions under the regulations. The regs in this part outline the primary decisions that can be made by the registering officers and the oversight decisions of the CRO, and Reg 33 allows a person aggrieved by a decision of the CRO to appeal to the Commission. The procedures for such an appeal are governed by Reg 42. Regs 36 to 41 provide detailed directions on all aspects of dealing with amendments or alterations to registers and lists relating to the address, name or particular of an elector. Part 4 General Provisions. Reg 42 sets out the procedure on appeal to the Commission against a decision of the CRO. Reg 43 to 47 gives general administrative directions regarding how notices under the Act and regulations are to be delivered, allowing access to copies of Commission documents on payment of cost to cover making copies, addressing consequences of failure to publish document in accordance with the regulations. Reg 48 prescribes that persons guilty of an offense under the regs shall be liable on summary conviction to penalties not exceeding $5,000 or 6 months or both. Part 5, the confirmation of registration as electors. Regs 50 to 55 details the process for confirmation of registration as electors. Schedules. The schedules contain the forms to be used in discharge of the regulations. There is a simple caveat based on technology, that the exercise of the power to apply electronic solutions may require modification of the rules and the forms.